Um, you mentioned there a couple of things I wanted to pick up. The pitch, right, at the City Ground, and I don't know if you have a program from your first game, but I picked one up. I'm going to send it to you because that
Brilliant,
is actually the program.
brilliant,
20p that cost.
brilliant.
Um, and in the program, in the forward, it talks about complaints about the pitch, right? And it describes it as a semi bog,
Yep.
which it was. And it talks about, the problem being so close to the Trent and the drainage and all this sort of stuff. And it's got a fantastic photograph, not a particularly good quality one, which you'll see when I've sent it to you, of the City Ground in 1947. Okay, a long time before, but the water is halfway up the goalposts, right? So it
Yeah.
wasn't a new problem. But my interest in that pitch, and I remember it very well, it was just basically mud all the way through the middle, possibly a couple of bits of grass on the outside, but that was it. How, when Clough had clearly produced a side that played good football, and his famous quote about if God wanted to play football in the clouds, he'd put grass up there. Well, he didn't put it on the City Ground pitch, did he? Because it was like that from sort of October through to March. So is that something that you remember clearly, when going to your first games, this, muddy basically? And how did they play such good football when the pitch was so bad?
I just think they took the excuse away that that's just the way it had to be. So you were expected back then, whatever the conditions, you had to hit a certain standard. I mean, that's not the case now. If the pitch is even slightly off, they'd probably consider calling the game off, which
Yeah.
I think from a spectator perspective, with the price of tickets, now you do deserve to put the best quality of football on show for the spectator. Back then,
Yeah.
they couldn't do a great deal about it. What did happen as the 80s rolled on was that Brian took a lot more of an interest in the standard of the pitch. And the groundsman at Forest at the time, I think he eventually went to Highbury or Wembley, one of the two. He was winning groundsman of the year on a season by season basis because they did work it out. The problem still exists today because they're so close to the Trent. That half of the pitch is always softer than the other half, and there's not a great deal that they can do about it. But it was never as bad, I don't think, as the night they played Cologne. I mean, it was literally knee
Mm.
deep, and it turned out to be 3-3. Wonderful game of football, and it didn't slow anybody down. But I just think it was that necessity of, well, nobody's going to change it, and we're not calling it off. And you're supposed to be a decent footballer, so get on with it. I don't think there was any science to it. I just think that's just what they had to do. I mean, one thing I can't work out. Somebody said to me last week, you know what significant about today? This was the weekend just gone. The
Mhm.
yellow ball's gone. It's the white ball again now.
Yeah,
Why do we
yeah,
have a
yeah.
yellow ball? They're never going to play on a field with snow on it. So why would you? You're only changing the ball to sell different balls. You're not changing it for any improvement in the product. And you play under floodlights with a white ball. You play under floodlights with a yellow ball. It makes no difference. So
Yeah.
it's certain things that they do. I mean, it used to be quite when they used to get the orange ball out. There's a famous
Yeah,
shot
with the snow. Yeah, 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 yeah.
20 yards into the top corner on Boxing Day with the orange ball. I mean, that was needed back then because they were playing on the snow. But I just think it was a case of getting on with it. And somebody said to me that I was doing the radio on Friday, and we had an email sent in, and somebody said, "Do you think that players are injured more now just because we know more about injuries?"
Mm.
But back then, I spoke to Gary Birtles not that long ago, and he said he played however many hundred league matches, never had a hamstring strain, ever. And
Wow.
he said, I never really warmed up. He said, I used to sit on the treatment table and read the Racing Post. He said, I'd get off, jump up and down 3 or 4 times, have a little stretch, and I'd go out and play. And he said, I never pulled a hamstring. He said, if you go back to that time, how many players were ever out with a hamstring strain? And if you think about
Mm.
it, it was hardly ever. So
Mm.
I don't know. Obviously, obviously the way the athlete's body is put together now is kind of like a finely tuned machine. So you're going to get more issues. But I think if you ask the current player to play on those pitches, I don't know whether the bodies would take it based on what they're used to now. Back then, I always think they were built more like 4x4s than Ferraris, and these days they're more Ferrari than 4x4. So I think that the makeup of the footballer is different now. The requirements are different. You know, they would play, that European Cup side would play 60 or 70 games in a season with a squad of about 14. So you knew you were going to play the majority of the matches. So your body was then put together to deal with that. So I think when we get this argument about, oh, well, could that team have done that here and that, you would have put the players together differently. The requirements would have been different. The training would have to be different. So I think it's difficult to make a comparison based on what a footballer looks like today physically compared to what they were back then.
Yeah, I don't think John Robertson would have enjoyed the fat test very much, would he? And also you've got to bear.
Can you imagine Robbo on a pitch today with today's rules, where you can't kick him? In fact, you can't really go anywhere near him, and the ball's never going to bobble. When people talk about these all-time greats, I think you've got to say, you imagine George Best on the pitches now, Maradona on pitches now. Maradona used to be butchered from game to game.
Absolutely.
There's a guy called Goycochea. He was known as the Butcher of Bilbao, and he made it his business to damage Maradona. Did his ankle in a game, horrendous challenge. That was the only way they could stop him. The pitch was bad. The defenders were brutal. If you put those players into today's game and you say you can't touch that individual, you're going to get sent off, and the pitch is like a carpet. I'd love to see those. I'd love to see Zico and Socrates and that 82 Brazil team play on today's pitches just to see. I think it'd be sensational because they had so many things to overcome before they could actually do their jobs properly. So it'd be fascinating.
Maybe we could use AI for that. I'm not sure how it would work, but we can use tech. And also, I think you're quite right about the number of injuries now. You talk about hamstring injuries. As a Palace fan, we've got quite a few there. So Lise's been out for most of the season through a hamstring injury, as has Eze. You think about all the sports scientists, all the soft massage therapy, individually, they are being looked after to a huge degree. Whereas you say Gary Birtles might jump up and down a couple of times and he might have gone to the physio to warm up with a bit of embrocation. That would have been it.
Yeah.
But they weren't injured. So these guys are playing in much better conditions, much better looked after, but they're much more injured. There is something wrong.
They're breakable. The modern player is breakable, and the load dictates the level of injury. I mean, we said a while back when COVID came in and the calendar wasn't altered significantly enough, i.e. competitions or tournaments taken out to reduce the load. In actual fact, we did it all in a shorter period of time with less recovery time for the players. But there has to be a knock-on effect. And I think we're seeing that now, that more players are breaking down, more ACL injuries, significant injuries. I think it's the schedule. I think it's the plastic in the pitch doesn't help. There's no movement for the joints. I think a soft pitch might damage entertainment on occasions, but it's a lot more forgiving on the human body. So I think there are factors that lead to this issue occurring, and I think the football schedule right now is at the max. I don't think you can add anything else in. But then the more and more I see, other tournaments are going to be added to a calendar that players' bodies can't cope with. What I fear is that we've always kind of had this idea that you start to get into the first team at 20, 21, and then you play to 34, 35, and then you go off and become a manager. I mean, in reality, players should be playing longer now because of the science and because of the way things have changed. In actual fact, I wonder if the schedule is going to be as severe as it is, that you might actually see that reduced rather than increased, because the bodies just need rest, more rest. You've got to rest the muscles, the joints. That would be my concern, that careers become shorter rather than longer based on the load.
Yeah, as you say, I mean, there are moves to, introduce all sorts of competitions, aren't they? FIFA are up to their usual tricks. It doesn't make any sense. I love football. I think there's enough to satisfy me at the moment, satiate my desire for football. I really can't see needing any more competition. But sorry, going way back to your first match and your first matches at City Ground, was there anything memorabilia that you really got into? Were there scarves? I mean, probably too late for rattles. I remember there used to be rattles. Can you imagine
Oh,
going into
Rattles,
a?
Rattles are way before my time.
Yeah,
Um,
sorry about that. I am a little bit
yeah,
older than you, but
scarves. A lot of people had badges back then. Nobody seems to wear badges anymore, but badges
yeah,
was something that people bought. But it was always a case of birthdays and Christmas. It was either the home kit or the away kit. So
yeah.
you got both kits. There weren't 3 and 4 kits. There were two, and
No, no, no,
those
no.
kits tended to last longer than one season. So you over the course of birthday or Christmas, you'd make sure you got both. Um, I remember Forest had a club shop actually in the city centre, which was quite rare at the time.
Okay.
On a road called Clumber Street, there was a small store down there, and there was a tremendous amount of excitement because all of a sudden you could buy the goalie kit, which you couldn't get the goalie shirt. So everybody
Mm,
wanted the goalie shirt because they weren't available. So things like that, really, and posters on the wall. I mean, it was nothing like today where everything is associated with the club. One thing they did have, if you went to the ground on a match day and you got a can of Coke, it
mhm.
was Apollo Cola. They were the company that made it. It was Apollo
Right.
Cola, and the can was kind of it was a tin at the top, but the rest of it was plastic, and they were Nottingham Forest cans, so you couldn't buy a can of Coca Cola. You bought
Okay.
Apollo Cola, and the Apollo Cola was a Nottingham Forest can, and everybody that bought one had one of those. It was a local company, and they
Yeah.
got the contract to do the cola for the city ground. So which was quite unique. I mean, you wouldn't get that anymore, would you? So that
No.
was quite strange for the time.
And were you a program collector? Was
Yes.
that something you used to do?
Yeah.
So have you got a stack of them in the attic? Where have you hidden them
Yeah.
away?
What I did was I got rid of some. I've got all the main ones from that period of time when they played in. Because I've got all the European Cup programs, the League Cup through to the finals, and
Yeah.
all those. A lot of the ones that I had at the time have been misplaced over various moves down the years.
Mhm.
Um, but I've got quite a lot. Yeah, yeah. And even now, it just feels right if you go to get a program. It just feels holding a program and just having a program. Even now
Yeah.
on a match day, I'll go and when we get to the stadium for TNT, I'll sit and read the program. I
Yeah.
don't know anybody else who does, but I do. Sit and read the program, find out little bits and bobs. I was at Arsenal last week, and there was some stat. I can't remember what it is, but it was 3,000 and something days in the Arsenal program since Newcastle had
Mhm.
scored a goal away at Arsenal. So you get
Okay.
little bits in there that you think, oh, that's quite interesting. And
Yeah.
I always like to try and see what the manager says in the column. But yeah, I think I'm of a dying breed where the program's an important part of the day. But what these days, they're not the ones now. Nah.
Yeah. They're glossy. It is
Yeah,
sort of this typical sort of superficial stuff. It's all very glossy. It costs probably £6 or something. Um,
not ultimately.
Actually, talking about that program, as I say, I'm going to send you this copy, which I managed to secure. There's a couple of beautiful things in here. As I say, the pictures, you would not believe how bad the photographic evidence is. But there are a couple of things that really drew my attention is there is a letter in this program from the City game in 1980 complaining about the lack of publicity for the forthcoming UEFA Super Cup game against Barcelona, right?
Yeah,
So this person has written, go
which
on.
by the way they won.
Yes,
Just
I know.
this is how mad it was at that time. I think Kenny Burns ended up getting the winner in
Right.
over the piece. Charlie George played in that, so Charlie would have been there at the
Okay.
time. Charlie played in that, and they beat Barcelona, and nobody really talks about it because they won 2 European Cups. Even the fan
Yeah.
base don't really focus on the fact they played in the Super Cup twice. They lost to Valencia in one year, and beat
Mhm.
Barcelona in the next. But it's just like forgotten because well, they won 2 European Cups, but the Super Cup now you'd be doing your nut if you won the Super Cup, but that's just forgotten about.
Of course, of course. But I love the fact that they said that there isn't a lot of publicity. Why aren't people making a big thing of it? The second thing that attracted my interest was the fact that there was an ad for the National Coal Board attracting people. You
Yeah,
know, this was a few years before the miners' strike and obviously the end of collieries across the whole landscape. But
which
it
was a
just,
huge industry in Nottinghamshire, by the way.
yeah,
Huge
exactly.
industry
Yeah,
in
yeah, yeah.
Nottinghamshire. Lots and lots of coal mines. A lot of people worked in the coal industry. A lot of miners here, and that was a very significant part of everyday life here in Nottinghamshire and
Yeah,
Nottinghamshire. I always used
yeah.
to like as well that whichever the previous game was, you get all the photos of the goals and what have you, and the captions
Hmm.
are always interesting around
Yeah.
those two, which you don't need
Well,
of course now because we've seen everything.
of course, but yeah, you've got them in this program that's going to wing
Yeah.
its way to you after this. Brilliant. I've got a couple of additional questions. You mentioned your son. So, did you take your son to his first game, and how old was he? Do you
Yes, I
remember what
did.
it was?
I
Yeah.
did. So the first game I took my son to, he'd be about 5, and I
Hmm.
took him to Leicester, Manchester United
Okay.
at the King Power Stadium, the year that Leicester won the Premier League. So
Oh
remember, Di
wow.
Maria scored a really good lob. Leicester won. They actually took Man United to the cleaners in the end. But Di Maria
Hmm.
scored a really special goal and lob, and it was at our end. We sat behind the goal.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, he was a bit different to me because I know because there's so much other stuff to do. Where I remember going to my first game and I was absolutely buzzing, like couldn't sleep for a week or
Yeah.
two before, knowing because it was somewhere that was special. Now there's so much of it, so much to do that I don't know whether kids actually think about it quite like that. But he enjoyed it. He liked it, and he plays football now. He's in the academy at
Hmm.
Forest. He's under 15s there. He's been there since he was 9. He loves it. It's part of his life. He
Yeah.
likes to go to the games and stuff. But yeah, that was his first one. Leicester Man United, good game. Something like
Okay.
4-2 or something. I can't remember.
Yeah, I do remember it. Yeah, yeah,
A really, really
yeah.
good match. And I remember thinking when I got back in the car, I hope he doesn't think it's like this every time you go. A nil-nil on a winter's night is not like this. But he was buzzing. Oh, this football's great, Dad. So it was all right. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
we go a lot. I try and take him when I can. And the older he gets, the easier that becomes. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, he's football's football's a big part of everyday life in this house. My wife even enjoys it now. She didn't, but my
Right.
daughter plays on a Sunday. She's in a team, so we've got my daughter's games on Sundays. Luca plays for the academy, so there's football going on all the time in here, which is great for me. I love it.
Brilliant. Also, I wanted to just touch on your first professional experiences. So, I think you said to me that your first radio commentary was also a Leicester game, Leicester Wolves. Is that right?
I didn't commentate. I went to do report.
Oh,
The first time I
reporting. Okay.
the first time I ever did any commentary was in an FA Cup run, and it would have been about, I would suggest, 92, 93. Forest played Hereford in an FA Cup
Okay.
fourth round game at the City Ground. Teddy Sheringham scored. I remember Teddy Sheringham
Hmm.
scoring. And I remember it because they'd asked me to go and do goal highlights, goal flashes. So I
Right.
wasn't doing the game in full. I was doing the flashes.
Hmm.
And I went to say, I wanted to use the phrase, which was a bad phrase anyway. I wouldn't do it now. That Teddy Sheringham had managed to steal a yard on his marker to put the ball in. Well, I actually said a yard on his yarker instead of a yard on his marker. And it was just
Yeah.
this complete embarrassment of ballsing it up. So
Yeah.
that was the first time. The first game I did was that Leicester Wolves match, which was reports. And then
Yeah.
about a fortnight later, the next home match, they were involved in this mad 5-4 game against Newcastle, where David
Mm.
Kelly got a hat trick and Mickey Quinn got one.
Yeah.
And I had them both on the radio together, which you'd never get now. They came up into the stand. It was local radio. They both got hat-trick. I mean, this would be like obviously the Championship Division 2 as it.
Yeah.
They both got a hat-trick. They were both really good guys and did a fantastic interview together. And he was. Wow. I remember thinking he just really struggled to get that now. You know, just the access, be prepared to do it, and that was probably my first experience of that. And then over the fullness of time, probably by an attritional victory for me, I managed to break people down to the point where they trusted me to go and do commentary on football matches. And we used to, at that time, we cover Nottingham. So we do Notts County when they were at home and Forest when they were at home on alternate weeks. We then focus more on Forest. So I remember commentating on Brian's last home game against Sheffield United when they were relegated, which was extremely sad. But I also then followed them through with Frank Clark when they got promoted, finished third, went into Europe, got to the quarters, and then through good teams up until 2004. So I was really lucky to get to follow my hometown club for a period of time. And if I'm honest, before I finish, I'd love to do another season commentating on Forest. I'd really enjoy that. I'd probably do it for free just for the opportunity to do it again, because I had so much fun doing it. But it kind of worries me, Richard, you know, for modern commentators, because when I started, there was the opportunity to do hospital radio, local BBC, local commercial, and then the national radio at the time would be 5 Live, Radio 2 before that. Yeah. But now there's not really hospital radio. There's no local commercial. I think opportunities for young commentators now are really difficult to get. I know people say, well, you can do your own, you know, you can comment on your phone. You can't, it's not the same. You need the pressure and the adrenaline of people listening to you.
Sure.
So I think I'm a little bit disappointed for the next generation of commentator, how they're going to get the opportunities to do what I love doing, and get that body of work behind you so that you can have more chance to be successful at it, because you learn so much on the local beat of how to speak to people, what the requirements are. You kind of fine tune your trade, you make your mistakes and get gradually better, but that takes time. And I'm not necessarily sure that exists. I mean, we've got a situation here, Colin Fray's the Forest commentator, and Colin's been doing that job for, it must be 25 years now. And apart from Colin, there is nobody else, because there's no other avenue anymore. So Colin does a wonderful job. But if you're a youngster in Nottingham, he or she wants to be a football what do you do? I don't know. I don't know. It's a difficult road now for people to come into my profession and be able to progress and see a pathway to go from A to B.
Yeah, because as you say, that hospital radio local, it's like an apprenticeship.
Yes.
So you make mistakes, but you get into the rhythm of it. Whereas now you'll be straight into, you know, quite a high profile thing. And mucking up your words can have an impact.
I mean, the crazy thing now, we've got this mad situation at TNT where Adam Somerton, who I work with, when I first was given a job in radio, it was given to me by a fellow called Tony Delahunty. And Tony I had no designs to be a football commentator. I was working on the building.
Oh, really?
And Tony had a PR company, and through process of elimination, he needed somebody to help out. And I ended up being given a job with no experience, no hope whatsoever. Some people will say not a lot's changed now, but no hope.
Come on.
But Tony spent a lot of time with me and helped me and gave me his expertise and started me off on the road. And bizarrely, Tony then became, much later in his broadcasting life, the director of a radio station in Mansfield, and actually gave Adam Somerton his first opportunity. And now we both work at TNT together, having been kind of dragged off the street by the same fella who gave us an opportunity to do well. So it's quite a nice it's quite a nice bit of symmetry to it, really.
That's great.
Somebody might
Talking of
say Tony's a bad judge, but hopefully not.
no, come on. Talking of symmetry, actually, funny enough, going back to that Leicester Newcastle game, as you say, what an extraordinary game. I I looked it up. That was in December 1990. Do you know what happened at St James's Park in January 1990? So just, you know, almost 12 months beforehand. Newcastle 5, Leicester 4. I mean,
Really?
yeah, I just
I
couldn't.
didn't know that.
I went through it, and then I, got on YouTube and I watched,
Yeah.
and Quinn scored a couple of goals for Newcastle, and Leicester were 4-2 up, and then Newcastle won 5-4. Can you
That was
imagine?
that was at the time when I think David Pleat was the Leicester manager. So
Yeah,
David was in charge. And then the Leicester team was David Oldfield, Ali Mocklin, people like
yeah,
that. Steve Walsh would have been on the scene. And
definitely, yeah.
they went through. They went through. I think David got sacked that year, and Gordon
I
Lee
think he
came in,
did in
set them
January.
up
He
at the
got
end against
sacked. Yeah,
Oxford. Yeah,
yeah,
right at the end, they had a game against Oxford to stay in the division, which I covered as well. Gordon Lee would have been the manager, and then
yeah.
they started to build it from there through Mark McGee, Brian Little, and
Mhm.
gradually went to Martin O'Neill and the success that they had. But I think a lot of it, if you live in a certain area, you need to be in a certain area. We were really lucky that we got Forest, Leicester, Derby, Notts County, Mansfield, all in a very small
Yeah.
area. And Notts County were a top flight club back then under Neil Warnock and were
Mhm.
really good. It was a really fertile area for football. A lot of rivalry, always seemed to be a big game. There was always
Yeah.
somewhere that you had to be. And I think we're very lucky when that's the case too. And it's not quite as fertile now as it was with Derby down in League One and Notts in League Two, Mansfield down there as well. But the teams were a lot closer together back then.
Absolutely. I think one more thing I was going to ask you, because it's been fantastic. I mean, I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I think what comes across is your passion for football. It started way back when, and it's obviously followed you through because you just it comes across, in spades how much you love the game, and you followed Forest all the way through. Do you? Do you approach commentary in a slightly different way now than when you first started? And also, how much pleasure do you get actually going to a game as a neutral, just not having to commentate? Not necessarily a Forest game. You might be just going to a game and just taking it in, not having to have your notes ready, not having to have all that. Is that something that appeals
Yeah,
to you more and more?
yeah, I love it. I do. I really enjoy it. I mean, the schedule that I have means that I don't get a great deal of time to go to a game that I'm not actually working on. This is one of the rare weeks where I have no midweek or weekend games. So you always seem to be going on to the next one. But I class every game that I do as turning up as a neutral because I've not got a horse in the race. So
Yeah,
I'm hoping that, and I don't want this to sound corny or cliche, but I honestly, genuinely would tell you that I get the same buzz now walking into a ground on a Saturday as I had as a kid way back when I did it then. There's just something in me that football triggers. I get so I'm the kind of guy that when I go and see big teams, I want to see the big players play well. So
mhm,
I went to the Emirates at the weekend and I watched Arsenal play against Newcastle, and Arsenal were fantastic. And I get a real kick out of being in the stadium to see that team play like that. I'm not an Arsenal fan, but I'm a fan
mhm.
of exceptional football. And when I see Jorginho play to that standard, Declan Rice,
Yeah,
Bukayo Saka, that turns me on. I love it. And I don't think I'll ever lose that. Um, I think you start to approach it differently the older you get. And I think the world is different now. I think to be a football commentator now is a bit of a thankless task because I don't know why, and I don't know why there's so much focus on what we do. I mean, I can pick up a newspaper or I can go online after the Champions League final, and there's
mhm,
5 or 6 different newspaper people who have got an opinion on what I said the night before. I'm an irrelevance to that. unless I've made an absolute gaff on the night, I just concentrate on the game. I don't know why that would be. I don't get it. I don't see the necessity for it. I think if that's where you are within your profession, you probably need to take a look at it. If you're more worried about what I'm doing during the Champions League final and not what Manchester City and Inter Milan are doing, I think then you might need to reassess.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of, I don't know what, I've always been, whatever anybody's profession is around the game, it's the game that matters. So to me, that should be the sole focus because there's so many layers to it. We're so blessed to have this game that gives us everything. It's a soap opera. It's life. It's sport. It's passion. It's competitive. It's everything you want from your day. Our sport gives it to you. And to play such a minor role in that, but to have the privilege to be involved in a small way means so much. I mean, I never thought that I'd do what I do. Never thought I'd last as long. I hope I can do it for another 20 years. And I just love it. I love everything about it. Yeah, we can all have a moan and say, well, why they're doing that and why they're doing this and what's VAR doing and what's financial fair play and all that. But it's another chapter in the story, and the story's never going to end. We're going to end before the story, and the story's going to go on and on and on and on and on, and we just get this front row seat to watch it. And yeah, I absolutely love it. I feel very, very lucky to do what I do. I never complain about a game. I can't abide people who go and cover football matches and then complain about it because we're being taken inside, given the best seat in the house. We're getting paid for the privilege, and then you're telling the people at home who have been waiting for it all day that it's crap. I mean, come on, do me a favor. They would all swap places and probably should swap places if that's the way you look at it. I can't stand cynicism around it because we're so lucky to do what we do, and everybody's trying to do a good job. Whether you're a broadcaster, a writer, camera person, sound technician, whatever, director, producer, everybody's trying to do the best we can. And we all do it from a place of being exactly the same as the people who are watching it. We're all fans and we all love it. And if I ever stop feeling that way, I can put my hand on my heart and tell you I'd stop doing it because it just wouldn't be right. Because we're so privileged to be able to do this, that if we're not doing it for the right reasons, we should let someone else have a go. And I think that should be across the board. I genuinely do. I would stop. If I, and I know I won't stop loving it, so they're going to have to drag me out kicking and screaming. I can tell you that. And I'll be putting up quite a fight when they're dragging. You know what I'm coming from? You know, I get the impression that you feel the same. That if I didn't have a mortgage to pay, I'd do this for nothing, just to stick around longer. You know, this is not a job for me. This is a life that I've been gifted that I wouldn't swap with anyone in the world. I genuinely wouldn't.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, saying when you're a writer, you do it because you enjoy doing it. You enjoy getting into the detail of talking to people. You know, because as you say, that's a privilege, getting access to people that you wouldn't normally if you were just a supporter. So, yeah, I mean, talking of a privilege, it's been a privilege talking to you today, Darren. I've absolutely loved it. We seem to have gone on for an hour or so, which, you know what it's like. When you're enjoying yourself, it just goes very quickly. And that's said for just one last question to throw at you. Is there one abiding memory of that first match or just the first few matches you've been to that's the one that you went, that's why I really, really got this. That's why I love this. That was the all important sensation, feeling, whatever it might be. Was there one thing that you could pick on and say, that was actually it?
It's a
It's a sidewind question. Sorry, it shouldn't have come at the end.
No, I I don't want to be kind of boring with the answer, but I kind of think it was the package of everything. When you go to the City Ground, you walk across Trent Bridge and the
Yeah.
ground's on your left. My granddad used to park on the river, and we'd walk up the river, and then we'd come out onto the bridge, and you'd walk in, and you could see the stadium on your left, and you
Mm.
could hear it, and you could smell it,
Yeah.
and the senses started to tingle from that point. Um, I think one thing that there was a couple of things that kind of they were like television personalities. When you're a kid, you don't think you're ever going to meet a footballer. And my
Yeah.
mum had a brass and copper business, and she bought brass and copper from a wholesaler in Sutton in Nottingham. And when we walked in there one day, Kenny Burns was in there, and he was the guy's
Oh,
mate.
wow.
I'd broken my wrist, and Kenny was playing for Forest. They were European champions at the time, and Kenny signed
Mhm.
my plaster. And that was
Oh,
one of the
wow.
moments when all of a sudden I could touch a footballer. Wow. I'd never
Mm.
seen a footballer in the flesh. I had in the stadium, but not in the same room as me. So
Yeah.
that was kind of one of the things. And with um, I really like the Tottenham team, 81 that won the FA Cup, Glenn Hoddle's team,
Mhm.
Archibald
Yeah.
Cook, Calvin Roberts, that
Yeah.
team, really good side. And I bumped into Steve Perryman in the car park before they played Forest on a Wednesday night, back end of the season.
Mhm.
And Steve signed my program, and he won the FA Cup, and I was like, things. I think it's that ability to when you go to a game now, kids can't get anywhere near the players. I think it's a real problem because I used to get there. My granddad would take me early enough so that I could be where they you could stand where they got off the coach, and I knew if I got there early enough, I could get Brian Robson to sign my autograph book or program. Kenny
Yeah.
Dalglish, Glenn Hoddle, whoever the big stars were at the time. I knew it was just a case of being there early enough. There was no doubt they would do it. Gary Lineker, whoever it would be at the time. And I think that ability to be able to take the kids to actually be able to touch the superstars
Yeah.
is something we've got to try and get back, because that turns a television show into reality for young kids who are very
Mhm.
impressionable. And if your favourite players Erling Haaland, I know that it can't be a free for all in the car park at Man City. I get that.
No, no.
It doesn't work anymore. But I'd love to think there's a way that these superstars can actually properly interact with the young kids now and moving on, to give them that little special element that I was able to enjoy when I was younger, because that made it real. It
Mhm.
turned mythology into realism at the time, and it was wonderful. So, but I was watching the European champions, Rich. So I was in
Yeah. Yeah.
the best team I thought in the world. I thought we are going to win 55 European Cups in my lifetime. So I didn't need a specific moment. I
No.
just needed to see them, and I needed to be there with them. And then once I'd been there with them, you got me. I was hooked. I was hooked, and have been ever since.
And I think it's quite a nice symmetry there because when you said that Kenny Burns signed the plaster on your wrist, he actually scored the other goal in that Man City game, didn't he? Because France has got the hat trick.
Yeah,
Kenny Burns
yeah.
must have been a header. Can't imagine him doing anything else.
Oh,
So yeah,
by the way, I kept
it's
the piece of,
gone.
when they cut the plaster off. My mum asked them to cut the piece of plaster out that Kenny had signed,
Of
and we
course.
we wrapped it in cling film
Yeah.
and put it in the jar. And over the fullness of time, it just crumbled to nothing. So I've not got
Oh,
it.
I thought you were going to tell me
Oh,
it's framed behind
no,
you somewhere.
it
No, it's
crumbled to
gone.
nothing. And if you touched it, it crumbled more. So it's just like this. Yeah. So
Oh
I,
well.
I had it for quite some time, but I
Yeah.
haven't got it now.
Oh
No.
well,
No.
but you got the program coming to you, so that'll
Brilliant.
give
I
you a
really
nice.
appreciate that. I
That's a
appreciate the
nice
invitation
reminder.
today. I've loved talking to you. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
No, it's been a pleasure as well, and great to hear about that first match and how it became so important to you in developing your love of the game. So thanks very much. this will be coming out in early April, hopefully. So I'll keep you informed. But yeah, been a great hour and a bit just chatting and listening to and finding out about that first match. So appreciate that. Thanks very much.